The summit is about tapping into the healing power of women in terms of healing divisions in society. It came at a time when the land debate was becoming extremely polarized, and we thought that women could have a civilized conversation about a difficult issue, and that conversation could focus on a common destiny, building a united nation, and trying to find win-win solutions. And we thought this was possible because women in the past have shown their ability to transcend positioning, to transcend politics.
Dat is een goede idee om vrouwenmensen bij elkaar te krijgen. Want ons dan altijd ons is niks in die land. Ons is net daar gezet in die werk te doen en ons betekent niks. Nou voel ons op manier, ons betekent iets voor die land. Ik denk dat ons allemaal kan bij elkaar staan, zodat we meer voor die land kan betekenen. Professor Mandusela kan een groot verschil maken. Misschien helpt het aan het plaatsen om misschien zo'n nageloop te worden. Misschien helpt het aan het boeren om een betere mensen te verstaan. En als de boeren zijn mensen die werken verstaan, dan gaan we maar nog meer helpen bij elkaar weer. En ons verstaan goed als boer. Als het hart hier is, hij samen met ons, hij samen met ons.
The one part of the Constitution that is misunderstood is the issue of expropriation without compensation. There's been a view that says that the Constitution provides for it, and a view that says it doesn't. I made a submission to Parliament that said that the Constitution does allow for expropriation without compensation as a last resort in appropriate circumstances, because the Constitution provides for expropriation generally, and it says when land is expropriated, it could be expropriated for public interest or for public purposes. And when it comes to public interest, it also provides in section 25 subsection 8 that all of these rights that are guaranteed in section 25 may not necessarily be adhered to in the event that action needs to be taken to redress the effects of past discrimination. And that's where I believe that expropriation without compensation, property or land expropriation without compensation could take place. The debate though was badly curated because the fixation was expropriation without compensation is going to solve everyone's problem. Not necessarily, because only certain amounts of land could be expropriated. The kind of problem that we need to resolve is going to be resolved through cooperation and collaboration. There will have to be a lot more land that is freed without expropriation to address the disparities in the country, which surely are primarily a legacy of the past. Our common interest is food security. Our common interest is preserving human rights. Our common interest is also still being able to live together in harmony as neighbors, as brothers and sisters. And there's no point in solving one problem through creating a new problem.
Hier is ons 'n familie. Ons is 'n familie, dan is ons net 3 permanente mans en dan 4 permanente vrouens. Ons verstaan mekaar, hulle kry bietjie meer salaris wat ons kry, maar omdat hulle werk 'n bietjie harder en ons help vir hulle, en daarom verstaan mekaar altyd deur 'n baie respek vir ons die mans. Op ander plase is daar 'n verskil tussen mans en vrouens. Want vrouens kry nie dieselfde salaris wat die man kry nie, maar die vrou doen dieselfde werk as die man doen. En dit is wat die verskil maak.
Farming is a very complex task. It's not just about having the land, it's about the infrastructure you have to put in the land, it's about understanding the history of the things that you need to farm. And that collaboration becomes extremely important. And the few women that I met were excited about the support that they've received. And these were in the PMA. But I've also met women as part of the Tumor Foundation where they are dislocated totally in other spaces where they feel that they were given the land but without any support. No support in terms of farm implements, no support in terms of extension workers to just, hold your hand as you reintroduce yourself into farming.
Ons dieselfde kry, dieselfde werk, as het tyd gewees dat op 'n Saterdag moet insit. Toe besluit ons nie maar dat werk ons maar lewe so 'n bietjie harder in die week, maar ons moet op 'n Saterdag werk, en werk ons tot 12 uur toe. Nou soms maar werk ons lewe so 'n bietjie harder, ons moet oor tyd werk, en werk ons oor tyd, en dan gee van die skapkos af, miskien nog miskien aan weer. Dan gaan hulle voor sê, dan kan maar elke reis toe gaan. Dan gaan ons reis toe, ons maar lewe so 'n bietjie harder in die week. As dat is nog Saterdag.
I hope that during the land summit, we get women that are going to talk about insecurity of title in tribal land. Because we've been getting those stories as well about you've been farming as a family, but the title was the lease or the user title was seen to be belonging to the man. Wrongly. As a customary law expert, I know that that's wrong, but that's how it is implemented. The way forward is try to give land to those who need it most first, and try perhaps not to focus too much on restitution. If we're talking rural land, let's try to prioritize farm workers, for example, and other people who need land for a living. But let's supplement that with support system. Urban land, people mostly need it to build homes.
Ek dink almal moet hulle eie grond hê, want dit gaan hulle leer om harder te werk, gaan hulle leer om ander te motiveer om harder te werk. Ja, het is amper asof jy nou weet, ja, dit is myne, ek moet insit om uit te kry, ek moet hard werk, want dit is my eie grond. Ek wil graag my eie huis hê vir die toekoms. Dat ek kan weet, ek gaan aftree as ek oud is, dit gaan na my kind toe. En ek weet, ek het 'n belofte gekry, ek gaan, as het goed gaan, die swart bemagtiging, gaan ek my eie huis kry.
And we need to find a way to make sure that we can give land to people to build homes, and or those who have land, if they can share it voluntarily, they should do so. If it is going to need government to expropriate with or without compensation, it will have to be done as a last resort.
Daar moet communicatie wees met die regering van landbou en die plaaswerkers wat hulle eie grond besit. Dan gaan dit beter wees.
All this says is that we're dealing with a very complex issue. But we're dealing with an issue that is extremely important because land is a source of life. It is a source of wealth. It is also a grounding thing for people. And people have an attachment to land as an attachment to the earth. And when we deal with it, we have to think about all of those things and look at how do we balance the need for fair and equitable distribution of land, or fair and just distribution of land, with all of these emotional ties to it. But ultimately, how do we use this land conversation going forward to build a united South Africa that is based on shared prosperity, inclusiveness, and sustainable peace? I think that's all we exist for as a social justice team. It is how do we see conflicts that are rising in our journey to try and reconcile the way we are and the way we should be in terms of the Constitution. How do we move into those spaces though and ensure that the solutions that we implement are more in line with the country we're trying to build and the constitutional promise to everyone?
I think that video sort of perfectly sets the scene for the conversation that we're hoping to have today, because it just prefaces the fact that while South Africa is majority female, the face of poverty in South Africa is still Black and female. And so the driver of the conversation around redressing economic imbalances of the past very much needs to be situated around women and what is being done for them. And I'm sure when you read the program, one of the issues that is highlighted is that the conversation around land reform has been largely, ignored the voices of women in this debate. And that is what we're trying to achieve here today. And I'm very, very excited about the level of brilliance that we have in the room, the kind of experts, the kind of people that are going to be speaking today. And as I was saying to some of the ladies at my table earlier, I really feel like all of us are going to walk away from this having learned something, or be provoked into thought about things that we haven't considered before and hopefully challenged. We're just going to have some opening remarks now from two of the sort of senior people within Stellenbosch University that have created the platform for this very necessary conversation. Professor Nico Koopman and Professor Nicholas Smith to just come and really speak to us about what we're hoping today will achieve. So thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. It is with great excitement that I welcome all of you here today. This is a collaborative endeavor between the Faculty of Law, in particular the Chair in Social Justice, and the Division for Social Impact of the University of Stellenbosch. But it's also in collaboration with partners and stakeholders from society, and from academia in general, and from community-based organizations. So it's really a wonderful, wonderful pleasure to welcome all of you here today. I want to start off, because I don't want to forget to do it, by thanking Prof. Tuli and Leslie in particular, and Sarki, who you saw produce that wonderful video, for setting the scene for today. Thank you, Tuli, that you and Nico Koopman and Leslie decided very timely to have this discussion and this summit. So I thought that there are two issues worth highlighting starting off this morning. First being the participation and focus of women's perspectives on issues of land. Of course, this strengthens agency and voice of women, and it gives a platform, as Karen also said now, to making heard those voices that probably have been hidden and that has not been as visible as one would have wanted it to be in the last couple of months. Women comprise a little over half of Africa's population, and their contribution to the region's economy is undeniable. But we also know that they comprise or they constitute the majority of the poor. And this is also the case in South Africa. So despite women making up just more than half of our population, according to our Stats South Africa, they remain relatively unrepresented in positions of authority and of power. By 2015, globally, and this is quite a shocking statistic, women held less than 20% of board directorships. And in South Africa at the same time, it was around 17%. So that's in the private sector, but things does not look much better in the public sector, although we have made some progress. By 2017, when considering our whole workforce, the whole South African workforce, 44 in every 100 employed individuals were women. And while women did fill 44% of skilled posts, which would include managerial, professional, and technical posts, that figure was also 44% back in 2002. And that says something significantly. So even though we have made great strides as far as equality and gender equality is concerned in South Africa, I would say that with regards to women and influential positions, women are still largely underrepresented. I'm sure you will agree that it's well documented that women play a significant role in food production and therefore in food security, and that they make up a high percentage of agricultural workers in South Africa. Of course, we know that women are also the primary caregivers in households. We know that they assume leadership positions in the community, and more they are recognized as leaders in the community. Yet, secure access to land, let alone ownership and title, have been very difficult. So this is, of course, an election year, and some of you might have struggled in the traffic this morning. I understand that there are lots of problems on the roads. And I read on Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, that apparently almost 6 out of 10 voters in South Africa will be female in this upcoming election. So we are 52%, but we vote better than men. You know, we have other superpowers as well, but 6 out of 10 will be female voters. And that's quite significant. So, you know, there's many things written about women being peacemakers, being able to see the bigger picture while giving attention to detail, being able to balance different interests and making things work. But I also like the idea of women as influencers. And I think what we're starting to do here today is to bring together a conversation in a group of experts that may do exactly that may influence the discussion that follows. So I've read and seen a movie called The League of Extraordinary Men. I think today we have a League of Extraordinary Women together. And from my side, I want to welcome all of you, in particular our speakers, but also all our guests. I hope that it will be an amazingly engaging day and a constructive discussion. And thank you for being here in Stellenbosch today.
Good morning, colleagues, Program Director, dear Professor Smith, Professor Madonsela, and may I say cherished guests, honored speakers, treasured staff and students of Stellenbosch University and other institutions. And in conclusion, appreciated partners who worked hard to make the summit a reality, the Faculty of Law, the Divisions of Social Impact, our Woordfees, the Chair of Social Justice, colleague Tuli, and then also colleague Leslie, Senior Director for Social Impact and Transformation, and the Dean of Law, colleague Nicola. May I say to those partners a special word of appreciation that this has become a reality. I remember colleague Tuli mentioning after we had a great event last year, saying there's one thing that we miss in the land reform debate in South Africa, and that is the perspectives of women. And there we immediately started to say, this is something to work on. So thanks partners who responded to that and that we can be gathered here today. And then in South Africa, over the first 25 years of democracy, one of the slogans that we've learned is this one, all protocol observed. That says we're a country of inclusivity. Nobody is excluded with that phrase. May I, in welcoming you, make a few remarks. When we say we need land, one of the things I think we then say is we need a habitat. A habitat is a place and space where life is nurtured, where life is protected, where life flourishes, where life of dignity is experienced. That is life of healing, life of justice, life of freedom, life of equality and equity for all. A habitat is a space where human rights are fulfilled. And then we talk about all generations or dimensions of human rights. Political and civil rights, socio-economic and cultural rights, developmental and ecological rights. To talk land reform is to talk restoration to this habitat, to this nurturing mother of life. Life of dignity, life of fulfilled rights. For some, the habitat refers to a specific physical space, specific space. For others, the habitat needs not be a specific physical space. However, whether referring to a specific physical place or not, all of us want a space, a habitat, where life of dignity and fulfilled rights are enjoyed. In 1988, a South African theologian, Itumeleng Mosala, analyzed the original meaning of the word reconciliation. In the Greek language, there are two words for reconciliation. Reconciliation firstly means that those who were separated and alienated from each other become one again. The word he uses is at-one-ment, atonement. This at-one-ment is also at-one-ment with the land, with the habitat. Reconciliation secondly means the stumbling blocks to at-one-ment should be removed. Reconciliation therefore means social justice should be done, wrong should be right, stumbling blocks should be removed. Land reform therefore is a social justice matter. At this conference, we will specifically listen to the voices of women about land reform as a social justice imperative. Liberation thinkers have taught us about the so-called epistemological preference of marginalized voices. True episteme, that is true knowledge, can only be accessed if we give priority to marginalized voices. In still highly patriarchal contexts, we need to give not exclusive attention, but indeed preference to the voices and views, the perspectives and priorities of women. We need partnerships of all genders and sexual orientations, but in the partnerships, marginalized voices should enjoy priority. This summit wants to ensure that silenced, subjugated knowledges be accessed. We were immediately excited last year when Kolituli suggested the challenge of land reform as one theme where we explicitly need to hear the perspectives of women. In conclusion, Stellenbosch University is committed to excellence through diversity, to access excellent knowledge that takes our societies forward. A diversity of voices should be attended to, especially still marginalized voices. The university is thankful that a conference like this is hosted on our campus. Our rector Provim de Villiers was inaugurated as rector exactly 4 years ago. He then committed the university to be a transformative institution. In the transformation plan of the university, Stellenbosch University commits itself to be an institution that increasingly reflects dignity, and this important word that Kolituli referred to, healing, justice, freedom, and equality for all, and to be an institution that contributes to a society that is such a land, such a habitat for all its inhabitants. Today's conference will take us forward on this journey. So it is a pleasure, colleagues, to say welcome. Wamkele kile, baie welkom.
I've got a I think we have to recognize that Professor Koopman has the distinction of being the only man who will be speaking to you today. So well done. I am not going to give a long-winded introduction to Prof. Malinsela because I would take it that every one of you will know who she is. She'll be speaking about really setting into place an understanding of where we are in terms of South Africa's journey of land reform and redistribution. And I hope you enjoy the speech.
Thank you, Karen, for curating this conversation. Thank you to all of you for heeding the call that we come together to have this conversation, which I hope will be the start of an ongoing conversation until we're in the process of submitting something to the powers that be. I'd like to thank Professor Koopman, who, from just an informal conversation that we had in September last year, he thought it was a great idea that we should bring women together so that we could hear a woman's perspective on this matter. I would like to thank Dr. Leslie Van Roy, who is the real reason we are here today, because Professor Koopman and I had the vision, and in the end, he went and asked Dr. Van Roy to do something about it. And since then, Dr. Van Roy has been kicking all of us into shape to make sure that we meet and we arrange this event. also due to be thanked is Dr. Van Roy's team that worked on this thing, among them Saki. And I know it was a bigger team, and forgive me if I'm not mentioning everyone. And from our side, in the social justice chair, nothing would have happened if it wasn't for Mana Lawrence, Diane Kahiza, and some of our young people here who are social justice ambassadors, students, and I see one of them, Temba, is here. As Prof. Kaufman has already explained, the idea was to do two things. One is find a way to have this difficult conversation in a manner that is not polarizing. It is an emotional issue, but it was, can we have it without exacerbating the way things are when it comes to polarization? The second part was to just get a sense of what do women want when it comes to land? What has been their experience? What are their views in terms of how we can handle this going forward? I'm not saying women had not said anything. It was in the public discourse. You hardly hear a woman's perspective. You hear mostly political. And of course, women do organize events where it is their discussions. But we wanted to pull everything together so that at the end of the day, we could make a submission on what women think about land and what has been the experience. And I do know that many have submitted to Parliament. I'm certain that my colleague, for example, Zaza, Professor Zaza did submit to Parliament, and I'm sure many of the people in this room also submitted. My submission to Parliament was in response to the expropriation without compensation. And at the time, my submission was that we should not worry about changing the constitution, because within section 25 of our constitution, if we look very carefully, we will find an anchor point for expropriation without compensation. I also advise that it shouldn't be the only way anyway. It should be for exceptional cases. And I also advise that actual expropriation without compensation happens every day in tribal areas. And women have their land taken away when their husband dies, sometimes the whole family. And more recently, even men, sons, lose their land when their father dies. But also, expropriation takes place every day in rural areas without compensation, sometimes when public interest, I'm not sure there is public interest, so dictates if they're going to build a railway line or a road or something like that. Mining, when communities are moved, even today, when mining is going to take place. And then Kolobeni, at least the people decided, you're not going to do it to us this time. And I must say personally, I cherish the people of Kolobeni, because as a Pakutetwa, I came across many communities who allowed mining into their communities, but they're much poorer after the mining than before. But let me not be heard to be saying we don't want mining in communities. What I'm saying is the importance of dialogue, the importance of everyone's voices being heard. And when something is done in the name of development, it incorporates everyone's views, it incorporates everyone's human rights, but more importantly, it leads to sustainable development. Which takes me to why are we involved in this process as the social justice chair? The social justice chair is a project of the law school at the University of Stellenbosch. and it's an extension of the university's broader social justice program, which is a part of the social impact activities of the university. Our intention as a social justice chair is to do three things. One is to enhance scholarship around the issue of social justice, to make some impact on social justice in the university, and contribute to social justice transformation in society within our country and broader. This conversation, therefore, is part of many other conversations that we are curating around how on earth do we get to live together peacefully. Because we do already live together. But to live together peacefully, we need to live together under circumstances that are just, fair, and equitable to everyone. And to live together peacefully in a sustainable way, we need to make sure, as the UN says, no one is left behind. When you say no one is left behind, it shouldn't just be a slogan. It should be about meeting everyone where they are right now and making sure that they're included in everything we do. The social justice end plan you will see in your pack has 5 priorities, but I would like to summarize those outcomes into really 3 outcomes. The first outcome is policy reform to ensure that the policies that are drafted and implemented improve equality and reduce poverty. So those are just 2 things. Every policy that is drafted should improve equality and reduce poverty. And how we plan to do that? It's about leveraging data analytics for more targeted policy plan. That comes from a belief that we've become more unequal as a society here in South Africa and many places in the rest of the world, simply because we have good intentions but wrong instruments. Most people, when they think about how do we achieve equality, they think about how do we come up with an equality instrument. If it's people with disabilities, how do we come up with an instrument for people with disabilities? Older persons, children, women. But we don't think about what about the instruments that are supposed to be for everyone? Can an approach that says one size fits all achieve equality? Especially in a country where we inherited systemic disparities in education, in health, and ICT, etc. Can a one size fits all achieve our goals of an inclusive society of shared prosperity? The answer we have is no. Linked to that, we also say that society is a system. You can't fix a problem in one place and think it's localized there. For example, people are unequal in the workplace. Women's inequality in the workplace is not only determined by the conditions in the workplace. Women's inequality in the workplace is determined by health inequality, spatial disparities, transport disparities, land inequality. Because inequality operates exponentially. If I invested 5 rand to my colleague Karen here and invested 50 rand to my colleague Anita over the next 5 years, in 5 years' time, the gap between 5 rand and 50 rand would have widened. But let's say that after 5 years, I then decide that Anita and Karen, you're now equal. From now onwards, I'll give each one of you 5 rand, not 50 rand. Will they ever be equal? Never. not in this lifetime. So the land question has similar connotations. Where are we now? 75% land is said to be in white hands. We will hear from the colleagues who are experts. What's the distribution there between individuals and corporations? Because there's often that question around, is it really in white hands? Is it in corporations? How much of it is in? But what we do know is that between the state and government, between the state and Black people, who are Africans, colored and Indians, there's 25% urban land. And then rural land is said to be 72% in markets. We'll hear if the statistics have changed. Women are left behind. Not only in the broader sharing of land, if you go to tribal land, the title even today is insecure. Despite all of the work we used to do from Wits University with the rural women's movement, with Amiga classes, etc., we're still stuck in that situation where when the husband dies, there's no security to the land. And it's 25 years into democracy. People struggle with their graves, just wanting to go and see your loved ones in the grave. Well, you don't want to own the land, you just want to see your loved ones. That's a problem for people. Urban people, we have a huge problem of land in urban. But what personally I find confusing is government has been selling urban land. And yet there's a concern around availability of land for settlement. The other thing that is confusing is how in 25 years of democracy, we've continued to settle people according to race. When it comes to RDP housing, it's been mostly built in the outskirts of the city, which is based on a decision that was taken long before apartheid. And that was a deliberate decision taken long before apartheid to keep the natives out of the city so that they become a reserve. So we've continued that. But just lastly, you know about poverty at 55% across groups and 64% among those who are defined as African and 1% in the white population. Unemployment is a problem. At about 25%, if you include the needs, about 40%, young people over 50%. Can land be resolved in such a way that it improves our problems around economic inclusion, around unemployment, around food security, around stunting of the growth of infants because of lack of nutrition? Are there options to do that? Do we have examples? We're hoping that we'll come up with examples. Like, yes, we have a constitution that seeks to improve the quality of life of every person and free everyone's potential. We also have a constitution that provides for land reform and property reform in section 25. But a constitution is a roadmap. It's us human beings that can give meaning to it. And as we do so, dear colleagues, I would want us to just understand that the land question does not start in 1930. The land question starts in 1652, when Jan van Riebeeck came and requested land from the Khoi group that was around the station he was asked to come in. And they gave him some of the land free and some of the land was sold. And the land question started when Jan van Riebeeck complained that the land that the Khoi people were given was inadequate. And secondly, that they were starting to be expensive. And he decided, he went back and he asked the company to give him permission to seize the land. So a lot of us think apartheid started in 1948. It didn't. It was given a name in 1948. It started over the years, but you can check that if you want the authorities, I'll be happy to assist you with that. But for me, I would say the phases, the key phases would be 1652 to 1913. You get land sold, you get land seized, you get land annexed through state instruments. 1913 to 1948 is when you get the Land Act, which specifically prohibits for the first time Africans from buying land. That is 1913 to 1948. And then 1948 to 1993, you have apartheid. And then 1993 to date, we have a constitutional order, which ordinarily would have solved things, but you can't solve things if some are on the valley and some on the mountain. Just a short story on social justice that I was told was a case where you give young people two colors, blue and pink, and you say to the pinks, run as fast, the blues, run as fast as possible. And to the pinks, you can't run when I blow the whistle. And then after a while, you then say, now the blues can stop as well. And when I blow the whistle, everyone should start. But by the time they start, the blues are miles away and the pinks are far away. And of course, you will get a Caster Semenya who will catch up with the slowest of the blues, or Wade van Niekerk. But nobody from the pinks can catch up with the blues. But if you talk the land question, it's even more complex than that. In that you're not just talking about being stopped from running, which would be being prevented from buying land. You also talked about being, once you start running, being sent back. Mpumalanga, Dachakron, for example, where I came, people, where my parents were, my father's roots are, they bought the land themselves. But after 1948, they were required to relinquish that land. And some of the land that people bought was given over to chiefs as tribal land. I don't want to go the long story. You can read the story of the Royal Bafokeng, for example. They bought their own land, but under apartheid it was taken away. Fortunately, because they were educated, they got their land faster. But you'll hear in the video that was saying a focus on land restitution might not help us. Because everyone will have to prove title. And that's going to be very difficult. Maybe we have to think about a focus on land redistribution. What vehicles are available for land redistribution? And in that regard, I have seen that in the past, the blunders, for example, where we focused on the Land Restitution Commission, and Judge Mia will tell you about the problems there of incompetence, corruption, etc. Everyone knows the case of Malelane game that was sold, for example, for almost $1 billion when the valuation had put it at about 400,000. That's just the tip of the iceberg. So there's been blunders there. But having said that, there's been also difficulties around the negotiations, just getting people to part with their land. What other methods are there? I see our colleague here, Dominique from Spear. And Dominique, I only heard very recently about your partner. And I'm sorry about what happened. I do hope that he's recovering well. And thank you that you still took the time to come here. But, there were so many stories that we heard there, and hope around alternative ways of land redistribution. The video that you saw from the Naledi farm is an example of what could be done. When we went to Uppington as a social justice chair in Tuba Foundation, we met with Agri-SA there. They had numerous examples of what is being done there on land redistribution voluntarily. Either people being given shares or the land being subdivided. You'll hear in the video that I talk about maybe we should prioritize farm workers is because in the Freedom Charter, it had said land should be shared among those who work the land, who work it. Why for me that's an emphasis is because there's a risk that the farm workers just shift masters, that they cry for land, land is redistributed, but it's redistributed to a Tuli who's living in the urban area and then just employs them to farm the land. And that's not fair, but it's also not really creating the kind of land distribution model that is sustainable, because those who till the land have a vested interest in the sustainability of land use. Yes, it's true that running a farm as a farm worker and running a farm as a business person are two different things. And that's where we talk about collaboration and skills transfer. And then just lastly, dear colleagues, when it comes to the issue of expropriation without compensation, I would like us to discuss one issue that I have learned recently, that in the land phase, we're talking about the old land that was taken. For me, one of the areas where I think expropriation without compensation should be explored is the land that belonged to the state on the eve of democracy. And then people tore the register and appropriated it for themselves. And if we are able to find that land, maybe we should think about how do we get it. But understanding the complexities again, that the land might not be with the person who got it. Land might be with innocent hands. And just lastly, on the question of land on innocent hands, I've learned that a lot of farmers are now selling land to global companies, which is going to complicate the restitution process. I would say we're part of these communities. We need to look at how do we reach out to those farmers and say, do you want to live in this country for this generation and next generations? Because if we complicate the problem, we're complicating it for all of us. But we also have to look at politicians who are promising everyone land and say, is that realistic? How many acres of land do we have and how many South Africans? I attended a conference on August 9 with women like this. And when I said, I don't think everyone needs land, they said we all need land. So that's a bit scary. And going forward, as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anywhere. But peace is a process. Women in this country have shown previously that they can work across politics. We saw it in the Women's Charter. We saw it in 1956. It is our turn to work together to heal the divisions of the past through the land reform process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Stella. I'm going to mention two very important things. Firstly, the Wi-Fi. If you want to get access to the Wi-Fi, log on to the STIAS2 platform, and the password is conference with a capital C 2019 exclamation mark. Okay. Second of all, we just like to welcome the Mayor of Stellenbosch and the Municipal Manager, Casey van Deventer and Geraldine Nedler. Thank you so much for being part of this incredibly important conversation, and we really value your presence here. Our next speaker is someone who has done incredible things in the space of mining and changing the way in which mining operates and bringing about real profound issues of empowerment into a space that has, particularly in South Africa, been a site of massive racial discrimination, as well as a kind of ostracization of women. So it's incredibly important work that she's been doing. She's been a global sort of inspiration for how an industry that has been so closely associated with exploitation can change, can work for the better of all people. She was chosen as the Business Person of the Year in 2008. And she is also the chairperson of the Black Business Council. Bridget Radebe, we are very honored to have you speaking today on this issue of land reform. And she will be addressing us now. Thank you so much.
Good morning, ladies. Let me tell you my predicament. This wonderful sister of ours, she's truly phones me day before yesterday, and she tells me that I'm going to have the opportunity of speaking to unique women, and told me what it was all about. And, you know, when she said the word woman, I just thought it is something I should take up, because I very, very rarely have the opportunity of embracing people of my own sex. For 30 years, I've been part of the mining industry, and for 30 years, it's always been man, man, man. So although I was given a few hours to present what she asked me to, I didn't sleep overnight. I got off the plane, I came here, but that's part of being a woman in handling emergency cases. So I'm here with you. And I'm going to ask them just to put a little bit of that. Are you ready? Or 5 minutes? Okay, no problem. And when you're ready, you can just put it on. So bear with me. My presentation is about my life. It's about women. And the topic I was given, land and women, meaning history, common uses, and unity. But just to give you a little bit of the background on why I started to become the first Black mining entrepreneur in South Africa 30 years ago. I come from a rural village, and I'm part of the Makao tribe. You know, my mom is half Scottish, my father is a Motswana. So growing up, looking like me, but saying I'm Tswana, in those years when it wasn't unique or fashionable to call yourself Black, you'd rather it was better to be colored or Indian or white, because the laws were very anti-Black. But we didn't want to have an identity crisis, because my sister, when she went to school, she used to be pulled because she was too light than the other kindergarten, the other kids in the Black kindergarten. So my father thought, can I take my kids to where they can fit in? And we went to a boarding school that is in Albanwa. So proud by Afrikaans, maar it was Setswana, Motswana, and so that's where we learned Afrikaans and English, and we didn't study Tswana. But what came out of that experience of being a member of that community, we owned the mineral rights. And these mineral rights were owned by the community. And we leased the mineral rights to foreign investors for rural renewal projects that will come out of the royalty payments. And the royalty payments we needed, the women needed for seeds to plow, and the men needed for tractors. And we also needed it for the community, for roads, clinics, bursaries, and that kind of thing. But it never happened. We own a vanadium company, vanadium mines and many other mines that we leased out with the Royal Bafokeng Nation. It never happened. So we used to march, peaceful marches against the historic producer. Historic producer had the expertise, we didn't. We were not allowed to mine, we were not allowed to own mines. The laws didn't allow us. It's all about the land. Land and women, and the historic consequences it had on the women and children. So our men and us, and I was 6 years when I marched with my dad. And when I marched with my dad and the rural community peacefully, we were met with guns and bullets and tear gas and you name it. And my dad once looked at me and he said to the kids, look, if anything happens to us, the elders, one day when you're old, you will have to take over. Now I was 6, but I took an oath and I promised myself that one day I'm going to become a mining lawyer. But to cut a long story short, I went studied in this Catholic boarding school, and by German nuns and Irish nuns and nuns from all over under the Vatican. And when we finished our school, I was accepted by Wits University to study mining law, because I wanted to become a lawyer and liberate my community and all other mining communities so that we can get rural Europe projects created from the royalty payments of the mines. But it didn't happen. The regime at that stage banished me to University of the North, Tilburg University. I never applied at Tilburg, but I was told to go there. This university accepted me, to become a student, but I wasn't allowed to. These are the kind of stories every woman can tell. A year in that university, we strived against brunt education. Those universities didn't have faculties of mines, in mining law, geology. It had sociology and all these more, social kind of faculties. But you didn't have geology, mining law. You didn't have more unique economic sustainability kind of top faculties. We started in brunt education. I ended up in Botswana, which was part of the British system of education, part of Edinburgh University. Botswana and Swaziland were part of Edinburgh. And then was given the only university faculty that was able to accept me was political science, economics, and statistics, and that's what I did. And here I am. But I either had to do that or stay at home and never know whether I'll be reaccepted, because the university closed, everyone was expelled, but they open again. But to cut a long story short, I then worked for other companies, and then one day a man called Lawrence Mabunda walked in my office, and he then tells me he came with two Afrikaners, Dan Ackerman and Ian Cousins. And Dan Ackerman said for Lawrence, my Lawrence, hierdie dame, sy lyk nie asof sy in die mynbedryf enige ding kan doen nie. And I said to Lawrence, Oreng Muto, what is this man saying? He says, I can't even verstaan nie. And Lawrence says, no, I mean, why are we bringing these two Afrikaners here? No, we bring them here because they want to lease the mineral rights. I said, no, we're not leasing mineral rights. I'm going to go and learn, and I'm going to be taught what do people do in the mines, because we need to get intellectual capital. We need to know how to build the mines. We need to do geological surveys, bankable feasibility studies, and create an ore body that will create a mine. And those two Afrikaners took me to Vogel. Now, Vogel, deesdae, was 'n boereplek. AWB en alle mense. So, there I went with my minis, driving a two-door BMW convertible, and die vrou sê sy Swana, maar sy praat Afrikaans, en sy lyk so lig. En die pa kom, my broer, Patrice, hy lyk soos my pa. Patrice was my dad, but his Afrikaans was safer, very flat. And then there I was. For 2 years, I wasn't allowed to go underground. And for those 2 years, yeah, you're okay, fine. I'll wrap it up and you'll see a little bit of that. For 2 years, I wasn't allowed to, those years, the laws prohibited women from working in the production of underground. You didn't have to be black women, you just had to be a woman. Black, yellow, green, Chinese, you name it. And I had to defy legislation, but I was held by the National Union of Mine Workers, the mine managers, die boere mine managers wat Afrikaans praat, dan sê hulle hierdie dame sê ken baie goeie Afrikaans praat, so laat sy nou die presentasie doen. And then I'll do the presentations and I'll win the tenders, And this is how it happened. I'm going to ask you to show a little bit, and you'll see a little bit of what my world was. It's a little bit outdated because the video was done a few years ago when I won the Businesswoman of the Year by International Democracy Organization that is having its head office in Washington. Do you have it? Yeah. So it just gives you an idea of the world I am when I'm not here with you.
This world, the world, will be healed, must be healed. These brazen cities, the swollen mines, the mineral of our sweat, the teeming ghetto, the dormitory cells in towns and squalid squatter camps where hope smothers in attire. These furnaces of human indifference must incinerate with all the heat of a healing fire. Historically, mining investment in South Africa came with a culture of exploitation. Prior to 1994, South Africa's mining industry was dominated by monopolistic mining practices, with the ownership of mineral rights vested in the hands of only a few mining houses. Mining laws institutionalized the exclusion of blacks and females, with no black ownership in the industry. Rural communities were exploited and robbed of royalties for leased mineral rights. Then civil unrest and major labor uprisings saw the unionization of South Africa's labor force, with militant labor action challenging the exploitative labor policies of the time. As a result, foreign investors and financial institutions were averse to mining investments in the country. This mining exploitation culture was a universal problem and can still be seen in underdeveloped countries with emerging economies. It has often been observed that resource-abundant economies tend to grow less rapidly than resource-scarce economies, a phenomenon referred to as the resource curse. The masses are excluded from the economic benefits of mining and are challenging the mining practice of explore, exploit, extract, and export, which leaves behind poverty-stricken communities and ghost towns. In the late 1980s, Bridget Radebe defied legislation by becoming the first black mining entrepreneur in South Africa. Her role in the design of the new mining legislation was prompted by the prohibitive, exploitative, and prejudiced nature of the mining industry. Post-1994, South Africa's mining industry saw a significant economic paradigm shift thanks to the introduction of reformed legislation through the Minerals and Petroleum Resource Development Act. This philosophy advocates Bridget Radebe's mining practice, which encourages mining entrepreneurs to be agents of transformation, pioneers of change, and economic activists. The Mining Charter is a key contributor to compassionate capitalism, which requires 26% equity participation, 40% black managers by 2009, 10% female participation by 2009, BEE procurement, beneficiation, social and labor plans. As president of the South African Mining Development Association, the largest mining chamber in Africa, Bridget Radebe encourages stakeholders to prevent ghost towns through integrated development plans in favor of sustainable mining economics.
But we're very happy that for the first time in the history of the mining industry, the issues of true transformation has been addressed. We're going to have historically disadvantaged communities and operators benefiting sustainable development beyond project mining, skills transfer, and many issues that the President spoke about. And for us, the South African Mining Development Association, this is history that will enable us to continue with our efforts of trying to address the participation of those that have never been part of this industry.
The practical implementation of these ideas has successfully been achieved by Bridget Radebe, founder and executive chairperson of Makau Mining. Makau Mining Pty Limited is a pioneering African mining group with interests in coal, platinum, gold, chrome, vanadium, uranium, and mining services through shaft sinkers. Today, this well-established and innovative mining group is highly regarded for its transformative mining practices and unwavering focus on involving and uplifting local communities. By uplifting communities, the economic sustainability of the investment area is met. As Vice President of the Minerals and Mining Development Board, which advises the Minister of Minerals and Energy, Bridget Radebe is a highly respected global opinion maker and mining strategist. With 20 years of experience in the industry, her global focus has been in advising mining stakeholders, including the World Bank and mining producers, on the creation of sustainable mining models. She has been instrumental in addressing the financial challenges in the mining industry by creating a venture capital mining fund and advocating for the creation of a resources bank. As an activist, Ms. Radebe also played a major role in the eradication of the coal transport infrastructure monopoly and has consistently maintained a dedication and focus on education and poverty relief in mining investment areas. But for Bridget Radebe, success is a journey that has not yet ended. In the words of Nelson Mandela, I have walked that long road to freedom. I have tried not to falter. I have made missteps along the way, but I have discovered the secret that after climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. I have taken a moment here to rest, to steal a view of the glorious vista that surrounds me, to look back on the distance I have come, but I can rest only for a moment. For with freedom comes responsibility, and I dare not linger, for my long walk has not yet ended.
That's it. This shows that we all have an obligation. We are members of South Africa and citizens of a unique country where our leaders joined hands. De Klerk and Mandela came together and they created the Rainbow Nation. And we then managed to liberate ourselves from the political disasters that we inherited and did not create. But have we done something economically to sustain and develop our country economically? And what is the mandate that you're going to have for yourself and the country and for the people, the way forward? When I started making that oath to myself when I was 6, that one day I was going to become a mining lawyer, it didn't happen. I still pursued the vision of mining and I became a mining entrepreneur. Everything happens for a reason. And the reason why everything happens for a reason is because God paves your world to be meaningful. Now, you are all here having an obligation to something and having a cause. But when I stand here in front of you and I see the land that so many people, our people, are living in, and the majority of those people are in these rural areas where I build the mines. And in those rural areas, you find that the historic economic consequences of what we inherited still prevails. In those rural areas, there are women that are still very involved in farming. And the men have left them and became labor migrants because there are no jobs in those areas. And migration has been a fundamental disaster in our country. I've seen it. When you grow up in those areas, you find that the mothers are left with children and young boys. And when the men become old, they go to those mines in the past, before 1994, right now factories, and they seek for work. But what they do, they come back either in debt or diseased or old, retired. And the woman, your mothers, your sisters, you, if you were there as a child, would then participate in the functions of the females in the areas who are breadwinners. And as if you didn't have it, you didn't have enough. Your husband will then go and get some 16 valve or blesser and bless some young girl and then end up having many wives. Polygamy is allowed in the country. Polygamy is legal. And I always say to Black girls that, look, you want to get married one day, have room for a disappointment. Because if you don't, polygamy is allowed, you might be unhappy. Or go white, or marry a man from a country where polygamy is not legal. Now, I'm not here to talk about issues that has to do with men and wives and marriages. But do you remember what happened to me the last time? I was nominated a member of the BRICS Business Council, and the nomination was not done by the minister. The minister went to the Business Unit of South Africa, Business Leaders of South Africa, Black Business Council and say, give us 5 people that will represent South Africa in Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. And we were nominated. There was another woman who was also nominated. She's the chair, Lucy was the chair of IDC. And I was nominated, and there were 3 guys. And what they say is that this one is the seed is this and this and that. Me, they say because she's Jeff Hadebe's wife. Now, a woman never ceases to belong. Okay? You never cease to belong. Because when you're young and you're a Black woman, you belong to your family. Then you become independent, you have a job, and the day you marry, you are told, Omakoti, you are now belonging to the what? To a husband. And if you're from the rural areas and your husband dies, his brother or his member of the family can marry you. Yeah, they can marry you. And so these are the traditional things that we've inherited. But how is all this going to translate to what we are trying to do? Land, women, the meaning of history, common uses and unity. Let us see where we come from. We were part of a law. The law that prohibits women from mining was part of a law in 1842 in the UK. And this law in the UK was to protect the coal miners and from the children and the women that worked as slaves in the coal mines. And what the law did, the law was then in 1842, and then came let me just go through this in the UK. But when we started, and that was after the Industrial Revolution, during the Industrial Revolution, children and women were slaves in the coal mines. And children from 8 years until 12 years were working, and then they had to create a law to abolish it. And we in South Africa inherited that law. But that law in 1956, we then became part of that law. But that law was only addressed in 1996 in South Africa. After the new South Africa, we had a Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act. And the Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act, that's part of what the women were doing. The Minerals and Petroleum Development Act, they allowed then for the changes in the law to happen. What I'm going to do, I'm going to give you all this to read because I can't see here. And, it's too small, but you'll read through it, you'll all have it, and I'll just talk through the topics. Okay, I'll see what the topic is here, and I'll look at this and I'll help you with it. So what happened is that in 1996, we then created the mining charter in 2000, from 1996. Industry leaders came together. Pip Botha was still the minister at that time, the Minister of Mines. And I must say, he was a very good and unique minister. He was very helpful. And he always used to single me out. And when we were dealing with the transformation of the mining law, what happened is that in terms of creating the law from the old mining law to the new mining law, we then, we had to negotiate with the chambers, organized labor, organized business in the rural communities. It was quite tough. I was the only one who knew what was happening in terms of the resources and the building of mines. The mine workers were working as either artisanal miners or they were working as semi-skilled or unskilled miners. And here I was, this Black woman who had all the skills in building mines. Because when Lawrence Nabundla brought those 2 Afrikaners, I joined them in a company that was building mines. And we were building mines for the big mining houses. Vogel, Klerksdorp, Kaltenborg, the Boerelande, those years. And the gold mines went deep as far as nearly 4 kilometers underground. And there was this woman who'd go on a tender and then get tenders against other companies, and you get the tender to build the mines. And at that time, we had about 10,000 workers, a helicopter to go from one mining asset to another, and all that. But the uniqueness about being involved in this industry, where you mine, you find people own farms. And where people own farms, they are rural subsistence farmers, women, many of them, or boere,
Afrikaner sprekende broere who are very unique. And what makes me, especially now, think about the land distribution without compensation is about how we handled our challenge in the mining industry. When the Minister of Mineral and Energy, Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, made a speech in her budget speech, she said 83% at that time, before she became the Prime Minister, she was the Minister of Mines after Penno Magunu. It was Bertha and Penwell and her. And then she made a speech, and at that time we all knew 83% of the mineral rights and the mining wealth of the country belonged to 4 companies: Anglo, De Beers, Anglo Val, and Goldfields. And foreign investors and local white investors were not allowed to own. And it was because the ownership vested in the hands of 4 companies. So it was very important for the state to become the custodian of the mineral rights. It was very important for the state to take a sophisticated ownership of the mineral rights. So what South Africa did, and I always say to the politician, I said the other time to the Minister of Mines, Gwede Mantatjie, you were there as the Secretary General of NAM. When we created the mining law, this land distribution without compensation can be done in a very sophisticated manner without necessarily creating the fear and the insecurity. Let's look at our story and what we did in the mining industry. What the country did, the state then became the custodian of mineral rights, meaning that the ownership of what was below, underneath those ore bodies, in line with international practice, became the ownership of the state. And then you can go and apply for a prospecting permit or mining permit to create a mine. And if you do that, then you then at least own the surface, but you always have to apply. Now, foreign investors then managed to come on, and local investors did the same. But what we don't do, because we have a few minutes, so I'm not going to take too much time, I'm just going to abbreviate what I'm saying about, and you will have all that to have a look. In there, what we did in terms of the ownership, we then created a Minerals and Petroleum Resources Development Act, and the Act had things that has to do with ownership in terms of the historic mines that are owned by historic producers. You then go to the government, you apply for a mining right or a mining permit or prospecting permit. And when you do that, the government will give it to you, provided you have a B partner. Now, this B partner gives you the right to mine and the right to ownership of a mine, but not the right to ownership of the resources. But the B partner must pay for it. The B partner is not given a free gift. That is according to the values that you do a feasibility study, and you do due diligence, and then you pay for your shares. And the skills transfer has to happen over a period of years. But what worries me is I see that too often you find that the implementation of the law is not effective because people want to get credits. Why do you want to promote a Black person without the technical expertise or intellectual capital? Just because you want your company to have a tick so that you, the white person or the Black manager or the Black owner, can go and get another mine. Train that person like we were trained. And then make sure that this person who's white, who gives you the opportunity, sees the possibility of being given another promotion or something. So it must be an incentive for everybody. For everybody. When I sat on the SAPI board, and SAPI, I just, for 12 years, after 12 years, I said, no, I've been here too long. And then, my term finished. We were doing BE equity participation for BE. And the board members were also going to have. I said, no, I don't want the shares. Let my shares also go for the white workers. So the white workers and the Black workers can have a win-win. Because you don't want to alienate people. The other time, the bank I bank is ABSA. A young guy comes to me, and he comes being my relationship manager. I said, hey, Lam, how old are you? He tells me, I said, how many years have you worked? He tells me, I said, do you know what they're doing? They make you a renter black.
you are not going to work here because you're not going to, you won't make 6 months. So I phoned Maria and say, Maria, please, can you please make sure that I employ this guy? I'll pay you. And he'll work in my mergers and acquisition the department, and he'll go all over the world and do all the work, and then you can take him back because it's not going to last. They are putting you there because you are black. And Lonabo Maria, you want to have your credits as a company. So I'm just saying that, but I mean, not Maria. She's very unique, Maria Morris. So she listened and they did something. But lo and behold, the guy didn't want to take the advantage of what I was giving him and proposing. 6 months after that, he decided to leave. And he came back and he said, Maui, you didn't tell me the truth. Can I come and work there? I said, no. Then I phoned the bosses again. I said, look, I gave him a chance. Now I can't. Let him come and work for you and please help. If not, he can come and work for me. And the guy's there and he's happy. So all I'm saying is that in terms of this land distribution without compensation, and in terms of what we're trying to achieve, let us make it a win-win situation. We did not go and replace the white capital and the white skills and take everything. No, we partnered with them. We became shareholders. And over the gradual time, the white skills would then sell everything to us, or maybe would give. And the compensation wasn't given for the ownership that the state took on the ore body. But your mine on top was always under your control. But I'm just saying that we have an obligation in terms of our land as women. There are things that are happening, and I know there's insecurity and uncertainty, and I know that there are lots of things that we have to do, like in the mining industry, beneficiation. If you own a farm, and that farm, I go to your farm and I go underground and I go and create a mine that will extract maybe platinum, manganese, iron ore, whatever. Why don't I help you, the farm owner that's still farming on top, to go and create a peanut butter factory from peanuts? And if you maybe have trees, to go and create, like I said, on the board of something through the trees, we managed to have toilet paper, tissue paper. Trees doesn't just for paper, also other things. And I'm saying that we need to beneficiate. We need to create an extension of just the farmer. The farmer must also become the factory owner. The farmer must also become a factory owner that will create other jobs. If the farmer doesn't want to do it, like we, the mining industry, we are told every mineral that comes from underground, we need to extract and then create a car out of the steel. Whatever it is, the steel, and it's all there. You see my pictures and all that. And you create, maybe from the steel, you can create anything. Nearly 80% of the steel here, it comes from whatever comes of steel, vanadium, manganese, iron ore, mining. And if you want to also, from coal, you can then create energy. So I'm just saying that we need to beneficiate. In the presentation, I also have special economic zones. We have areas that the government has declared a special economic zone for, which is tax havens. It's no more sexy to own a factory in China or India. You can do it in South Africa because we have tax havens called special economic zone. So you can be a farmer, create a peanut butter factory, create a factory in a special economic zone, become a miner, extract the ore, create a plant that makes the cars or the plant that makes cell phones, whatever, out of the minerals. So I'm saying that the integrated resources development program is important. And what is important is for government, this is what I say to the portfolio committee of DTI on the 5th of February, when they asked me to come and talk to them. I said, we need to have a joint committee of Department of Trade and Industry, Department of Mines, Department of Finance, Department of Economic Development, and Department of Agriculture, where together, if a farmer wants to build a farm, create a farm, then the Department of Trade and Industry will say, okay, where will my factory comes out of what the farm production comes with? The mining person will say, oh, in that area, I'm going to do rehabilitation. So where I want to rehabilitate in that land, let me then use the money
and contribute towards all these objectives, the factory, the farm, and all that. So everything should be integrated, and these are the things that I normally would do. I travel all over the world and give a lot of presentations and stuff like that, but I love being at home. And am I a South African? Yes. Do I love where I am? Yes. Am I a happy citizen? Yes. But I'll only be happy if every time when I go to my rural farm, I see those poor family members of mine living a more unique life than the life that I saw when I was there. And as Nelson Mandela says, it's a long walk to freedom. You walk through so many roads and you come to on the top of the vista, and then you think the end of the road has come. But when you look through, you see there are so many hills to climb, and your road has not ended because the long road to economic freedom has not come. We need to continue being the catalyst and the individuals that will be responsible for our country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think from now on forward, we should all refer to Dear Kadebe as Bridget's husband. I think we can all sign up for that. Thank you for that extraordinary speech. And I think what we all got from it is just what huge intellect, capacity, and compassion and positivity there is in the business sphere. Sometimes it's easy to be overwhelmed and think that there's nothing can change. With people like Mrs. Radebe, that change is possible. We're now going to hear an address from, I know it's tough to follow that, Dr. Niva Saitam Makwetla. She is someone who has extraordinary insight into policy. She has worked in government, she has worked at the president, she has worked at COSATU, she's a researcher, she's an academic, she knows the numbers, she understands the issues, and she's going to be speaking about the main policy debates within land reform. So let's welcome her to the stage.
I'm not even going to try to follow that. No. I'm going to do the academic thing. Yeah, and so really, I don't know, we don't have a signal for changing slides. Is there a thing? Okay, so I didn't see that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so I think all I wanted to do with this was to say, how do we think about some of the debates? Because they've been semi-explicit and implicit in a lot of the inputs so far. But I do think there are some very major differences in how we think about land reform. And I have to say, I'm an economist. We think about these things really differently from how I think our colleagues from law think about these things. Social justice. I do think that part of the problem is we've all seen the debates have gotten deeper, and one of the reasons, and more vehement, and one of the reasons I think is from the standpoint of government, moved from a policy of restitution that was fairly clear-cut, right? So I think when people say restitution, if you're from government, you mean something very specific. There was a restitution program. It said if you lost your land in 2013 under certain kinds of circumstances, government would compensate you for it. Not necessarily give you back the land, but give you some compensation for that expropriation. Yeah? Basically, all the claims were in, and then we had to talk about redistribution, which was the idea that even if you couldn't show, if people were pushed off their land less formally, people who didn't lose it in 2013, people who were not legally deprived, should also have some access to land. But it's much harder to define when you're not just saying we're making up for that historical injustice very directly. You lost it, we give it to you. This is a case of, if you talk to anybody, people who were, their great-grandparents farmed the land, their grandparents were labor tenants, their parents moved to the cities, and they grew up in working-class neighborhoods with formal jobs. So who amongst them should get land, and what kind of land, and how should we pay? But the other problem, I think, it really is the context, and I think that came out of some of these early discussions, is South Africa is one of the most unequal countries in the world still. And it makes it very impossible to say, well, we made some small improvements. We've given a few people land. Yeah? When you look around you and you see the deep inequalities in the society. And also it leads to always, where there's inequality, and people have done studies on this, there will always be contestation around property rights. Because one of the most obvious, visible ways we can think about inequality is that rich people just have more stuff. but particularly often more land, more businesses, more opportunities. In this context, I want to talk about what I see as 4 high-level positions that have evolved in the discussions around land reform. And the reason for doing this is always to say, we have our own views. Can we think about the other options? Can we understand the other side of this discourse? Yeah? And those views, I'm not just saying stonewalling, no change, because I think that's kind of important here. It's, of course, a fifth position. But the 4 high-level positions, I would argue, is expropriation without compensation, which we've been hearing about. But also there's an implicit position, which is to invade land in urban areas, which is a form of expropriation, but not through the state. I used to say, I always used to say back in the day, you either have redistribution through the state, you have redistribution on a small-scale private level through crime. And this is sort of, it's not always through the state that people expropriate stuff. There's also saying we should use land reform to establish Black commercial farmers. And these get to more of the debates within the economic side of life, right? And the technocratic views. Or we should have land reform to improve living conditions, particularly for people in the historic labor-sending regions, which is my preferred term these days for former homelands and former Bantustans. Yeah? But possibly also for farm workers and urban jobless. In other words, land reform is seen as a program for the marginalized. Yeah? Obviously, within each of these paradigms, there are also debates, but I would argue these are 4 quite different approaches. And often results as we talk past each other, and honestly, I did this because I was at the land reform conference at UWC, and I realized that I couldn't understand what some people were talking about unless I unpacked their arguments more carefully, because their premises were so different to the kind of technocratic economic discourse we had in government. And I'm sitting there going, what are you talking about? And then you realize it's got a different basis. And I think to understand that basis, it helps to unpack the basic logic in a common framework. And that framework is, whose problems are we trying to solve? Every policy tries to solve a problem. They don't solve the problems for the same people. They're defining the problem differently. And by extension, what usually comes in, the way it appears is who should actually get the land. So when we say expropriate the land is easy, who gets it on the other side is hard. What is the diagnostic? In other words, what are they saying is the cause of that problem, and where does land fit in? And on that basis, how is land reform supposed to provide a solution? And in each case, I would argue that none of these positions, in my experience, talk about how they affect women specifically. So even within the groups of beneficiaries, which women, do women get a special position? Will women be actually able to access land under these programs? So the first one, which is expropriation without compensation, and really, I would argue the problem they're trying to address is that we've had democracy for 25 years, but most Black people are still disempowered economically, socially, and politically. Not the people in this room, obviously, but the people who never get into rooms like this. Yeah? And the diagnostic is that disempowerment follows because of deep economic inequalities, in particular, that are still aligned largely, although not fully, with race. Yeah? And that the second part of the diagnostic is expropriation of land was central to apartheid, and that created the inequalities. And that the 1994 compromise can be understood as saying we will protect property rights, use the power of the state to create more opportunities, and give people more services, and that in turn will lead to greater equality, and it hasn't. So from that standpoint, the compromise has failed. Yeah? So, because overall income inequality, there are more Black people who are rich, but overall income inequality, if you ignore race, is as bad as it was pretty much 20 years ago. I mean, there's this debate, is it a little bit better, is it a little bit worse? Overall, it's about the same. That's the point. The fact that we're debating whether it's a bit better or a bit worse tells you there has not been a qualitative shift. So the argument is, at least if people have land, they will have some dignity, based on the fact they will have some assets. They will have something of their own, where they have their own power. And the argument that I would argue is also that expropriation is seen as a remedy for that historic injustice, that people's land was taken, so now we give them land back, and we expropriate it because that's only fair. And also, it is disruptive. It is an explicit saying, this compromise hasn't worked. We can't work within this system. We need to disrupt the system. And as you all know from Uber, disruptions have good things and bad things. Yeah? And so the questions I would argue is, firstly, the original cause of a problem isn't always what leads to its reproduction, if you know the Hegelian dialectic. So even though inequality was created in large part by the expropriation of small African farmers, that's not what maintains inequality today, I would argue. There's a whole lot of other things like access to education, access to jobs, access to living in urban areas, a whole range of things that are not about, do you have land in the middle of nowhere, to be blunt. I actually worked it out, that if you took 1,000 rands worth of land from somebody 100 years ago, and you give them back that 1,000 rand today, but you had put the equivalent of that in the bank, you would have 13 million rand that you had earned off that land. They would have 1,000 rand because that's what you took away. So this whole idea that you just give back something that happened 100 years ago and that's the solution probably doesn't work. So I'm just saying there's a problem for me here with the logic. And of course, disruption comes with costs and risks. In this case, the costs and risks would be around food systems. I mean, most people in this country live in the urban areas. They depend on a few big commercial farmers to provide the food, like it or not. You disrupt that. That's why the president always talks about food security as an issue. Not all commercial farmers. I mean, very few commercial farmers produce, and they are company owned, produce the bulk of food that we eat. But the fact is they are there, and you can't just ignore that contribution and the importance of that for most South Africans. But also it can affect farm workers, and if you get the property rights thing wrong, it certainly has an impact on investment. Now that's a two-sided sword, because if you have deep inequalities, investors know something will happen to property rights, so they also don't invest. And you can see this in the ratings agencies, which always say the problem is high unemployment and inequality, even if they get, even if they have the rule of law and they're protecting fiscal stability. In the long run, this is not a stable system. So you could argue you need some kind of disruption to property rights to reassure investments, but you have to do it in a way that doesn't cause too many costs in theory. If you think disruption is good in itself, you won't buy that argument, just to be clear. And we all know who I'm talking about. But the other thing is not everybody will get land. And the people who have called for expropriation have been I have not seen them come up with a detailed program to say who should get it. And there's a real problem there for women, because typically you say, we'll give it to households, or we'll give it through traditional authorities like Tuli talked about. And the problem is that women have particular positions in those systems. And very often, everywhere in Africa, if you give land to a household, it means you don't give it to the women in the household. Because the household head, when there's a man and a woman, the household head is almost always seen as the man. Okay, land invasions. The problem is that there's a shortage of housing for low-income people in many urban areas. And it appears not just in terms of informal settlements, but in terms of huge overcrowding. And the diagnostic is, look, urban areas are growing very rapidly, and particularly some of the metros. So Johannesburg has grown by 78% in the last 25 years. It's the fastest of anywhere in the country. Cape Town's grown by about 65%. The Platinum Belt has grown almost as fast as Joburg, with far less resources. But even today, you can look around you and see the underutilized land. I mean, Johannesburg has 17 golf courses within the main freeway ring, for which they pay nothing. Yeah, I keep going. The Swedes love, Swedish people love golf too, but they put that way outside town because it's using up huge amounts of very valuable land. And the argument is that ownership is rooted in unfair apartheid laws, but it's also a poor social choice because you're having unutilized valuable land that could be used much more usefully by having people live there. But the 1994 compromise again says we have to respect property rights at any cost. And so the argument is the state is not helping people get this land because it doesn't see that as something it can do. So the solution is organized groups should just take the land and build on it. And that whenever there's a conflict between rights, I'm not a lawyer, but you can argue there is a right to housing in the Constitution as well as a property right. Yeah? And so the question is, how should we balance those? I mean, the question for me is, why did the cities not take more vigorous action to get land, particularly into town, for low-income groups? And is mass action the best way to change that decision? Yeah? And it's easy when you have a house in a nice suburb to say, of course, you shouldn't do mass action. But But I would say that part of the problems with land invasions is you end up expanding informal settlements. And I don't think anybody sees that as the first best solution. Now, if you know economics, you know we have a thing about this, a principle of the second best. It may be the best you're going to get. But I don't think anybody thinks that's ideal. But another problem is that the land is not, sometimes the land is underutilized for good reasons, not just because of ownership, but because, for instance, you know, what happened in Joburg, people were building on dolomite, which collapses, and it's actually dangerous. And sometimes there are social reasons, like you have industrial parks, or you have planned industrial, you have other kinds of parks, green areas, that you want to keep because of urban planning reasons, because of broader social good. But I would say something I've never seen anybody talk about. I don't know if women benefit, how women benefit from those land invasions. You know, I suspect that because it's harder for, you know, imagine you're a woman with children, to just go and join in an action like that to get the land. I suspect it's harder for women to benefit from this kind of land appropriation than if it goes through the state. Okay, BEE, now we're getting into the more technocratic debates. The argument is that the ownership of commercial farms is still disproportionately white. Basically, over a quarter of commercial farms are Black owned, although the data are very bad. I mean, one of the things is, honestly, the way you feel in government, land reform is one of our top priorities, so we put our worst people on it. We don't collect data on land ownership by race. You could do it easily using some of the household surveys. Yeah? This is based on labor market surveys that show employers informal agriculture by race. Yeah? But only 7%, by the way, are Black women in that total. Yeah? And what's interesting is that if you look at all formal small business, they are half Black owned. So clearly the share of Black ownership in agriculture is actually significantly lower than in the rest of the economy. And the diagnostic is, look, Black people could be entrepreneurs, but they can't afford to buy land because you're in a vicious cycle of poverty. Yeah? So you have your assets taken away. You don't have assets now, so you can't just go out and buy farms if you want to be a farmer. So the government should acquire the land and transfer it to emerging farmers. And honestly, this has been the logic behind most of the land redistribution programs so far. That they've seen themselves as targeting what they call emerging farmers, which are relatively small commercial farmers. Yeah? They don't see themselves as targeting, they have a new program, but it's only in the last year or two. They've never seen themselves as targeting marginalized people or the poorest of the poor. Yeah? But it's to set up a class of Black commercial farmers. So the questions are always with narrow BEE, in the sense of just changing ownership. How does this approach address economic inequality overall? Will it improve conditions for the majority? Will it improve conditions also for farm workers? You know, as I think Tuli said, if you just change the owners, but you don't change those work relations, does it actually make a difference to them? And if it doesn't help the majority, how do you justify spending money on it? And in fact, we don't. We spend a couple billion a year, which is peanuts on a budget of R1 trillion. Yeah? And part of the reason is this is not going to create social mobilization to get land. In fact, I don't think the people who call for expropriation probably even know it exists. But a third problem is, how do you decide who gets the new farms? And should skills and experience be a factor? Because if they're not, then you need to provide a range of support services. And we've proven historically very bad at it. One of the problems with framing the issue as land reform is that we don't say, what do you need to become a farmer? Land is only part of it. We just say, we'll give you the land and then we'll do post-settlement support. And we never do post-settlement support. Yeah? I mean, and one of the issues that many people have pointed out is land reform in East Asia was about tenure reform. People had the land. They were farming it. They were giving a third to half of their product to the landlord. They were just told you can keep that. But you weren't setting up people who had never farmed before on the land. So the whole issue of post-settlement support wasn't an issue because people had those systems in place already that apartheid basically destroyed. Yeah? And then again, how do you ensure women benefit? But even if you were to say that women should get many of these farms, you still have the same class issues. So most women would not benefit. And then finally, there's the idea of agrarian reform, which says South Africa has high levels of joblessness, poverty, and inequality, particularly in the historic labor-sending regions, which hold today around a quarter of the population. Now, I should say, in the late 1980s, the estimates are about half the population lived in those areas. So that's why the urban areas are growing so fast. People are leaving as fast as they can, if you want. No? But it's still about 40% of adult African women live in those communities, because of the whole history of migrant labor. Many of them are older, okay? So one of the problems, I'll get to, is there's actually not a lot of young people left in some of those areas. So the diagnostic is the destruction of the African peasantry explains high joblessness in South Africa compared to other upper middle income countries. And I have to say, I'm doing another presentation. 2 in 1 day for me strikes me as a bit much, but there you are, where I will show you the numbers. But the fact is, most other upper middle income countries, between 20% and 30% of the population is self-employed in agriculture. Here, those people are unemployed. And that's one reason we have very high joblessness compared to other countries. And the destruction occurred largely through expropriation of fertile land with water by pushing people into places like Kuruman, where there's not much of anything. Or even in KZN, where they do the little bits around all the water. They put Africans on the wrong side of the hill where there's no water, and they kept the other land for themselves. And that's why if you look at pictures of former KwaZulu Zululand, it was in all funny bits, right? So the argument is, it's not just about having land, it has to be land you can use. So even in some of those areas where the land is underutilized, it doesn't have the infrastructure, and often it doesn't have the water or the qualities you need to farm. So the argument is we should reestablish smallholder farmers with land, but also with support services and infrastructure. And then ultimately, if you do it right, you don't have to worry so much about expropriation because the land pays for itself. So there may be a moral issue about how much you should pay. I remember in Zimbabwe, my father was working there. He had this idea: we should just do 100% capital gains tax on land. You see what I mean? So you get what you pay. They didn't do that, which is one reason they ended up with land invasions. Okay, so then the question is, does this actually make sense as a job creation scheme? If the aim of this is to say we can create jobs and greater inequality by letting people get livelihoods from the land, does that actually work in the modern economy? The historic labor-sending peoples, they've lost a lot of young people, a lot of experience, a lot of farming skills. Is there enough skilled labor left for smallholder farms? And if not, do people who've gone to the urban areas see this actually as an option? There's actually a debate about this. I mean, I don't think we even know. Given social grants and other transfers to low-income households, there's not actually a lot of pressure for this either. So part of the problem is, and I would argue this is why governments never prioritize this. This is the economic argument for land reform, but most people, they want a job in a factory, or even better, a job teaching school. They don't want to actually, running a small farm pays terribly, and it's backbreaking labor, and nobody really wants to do it if there are any other options. Nobody in this school wants to be a small farmer. More adventures from my youth. When I was a kid, we lived in Tanzania, and we tried to do a small farm with some of the students, and it lasted about 2 weeks. See what I mean? Yeah, and then again, how do you ensure that women benefit? Because if you're looking at marginalized households, women are also disadvantaged in those conditions, as Tuli was talking about. But also, if a lot of the women who are impoverished are older or they have small children, farming is particularly difficult. It's hard to be a small farmer when you have small children. It's even hard. I mean, I could tell you a horror story from my husband's from Tabanshu, and they tried to set up a program there. The Agricultural Research Council tried to set up a program to help people raise productivity that involved capturing rainwater by carrying around very heavy bits of plastic. And they got annoyed because the moment they stopped providing labor and subsidies, people stopped doing it. And they said, you see, they're lazy. They just want social grants. It's like, yeah, you said yourself, they're also all elderly. This stuff is hard work, and it increases your garden, basically, your output by all of 20%. So I think that this idea that people just want to be, that farming is not easy. I'm not saying it shouldn't be a route, but I am saying I think sometimes the assumption that we can just go back to having 20% of the population as peasant farmers. Sometimes you have to say, would I want to do that before you say other people should do it? And that's one of the problems with an unequal society, because people see people like you and me with professions and don't see why they should be stuck with jobs at the bottom of the heap. Okay, so some conclusions. Firstly, just to say, the state always shapes property rights. That is the role of the state in any economy, but particularly a capitalist economy. The question is not if the state should shape property rights, but how the state should shape property rights, who should benefit, how do we make the changes that are needed to bring about a more equitable society. But also that women will always lose because of the way the system works. Women will always lose out unless you say explicitly, what do we have to do to make sure they also benefit? And that's particularly true whether you talk, when you just talk about these amorphous groups like households or traditional leaders or Black business, without saying what happens to women and specifically Black women. But also I would argue some of these positions, like I said, there are different aims and disciplines involved, and it makes it hard to understand each other. And you can see where people fit in on a variety of continuums, right? So for one thing, is ownership of assets that end in itself? Yeah? Or is it supposed to be just about it generates incomes? And there is an argument, even though it's hard for me personally to get my head around it, to say, sometimes just having your own land may be important, even if you never actually earn anything from it, even if you can't use it for anything. Yeah? But that motivates some people. Second thing is, should we try and disrupt this hegemony? And that's really when you talk about decolonization, for instance. You're saying, how do we disrupt this hegemony that devalues, the experience of 85% of the population? And maybe we need to do very disruptive things to get there. On the other hand, the argument is, but we want to maintain our production systems. So we're trying to fix this car while it's running, which is notoriously difficult. Yeah? Or you just blow it up and start over, kind of thing. Should we give people agency by promoting collective action, even though there are other costs? How do we weigh the benefits of giving people, so when people say, let's take the land ourselves, how do you give people that agency? How do you manage the costs? How do you decide how best to do it? Or do you just say, look, we're the technocrats, we can do it from the top down, we will design the programs, carry them out, everybody benefits. Like it's that service delivery paradigm is very strong. And the service delivery paradigm is, we give it to you, we deliver it to you. You can demand you do it right, but you don't control the process, we control the process. Sorry, I did spend a lot of time in government. And the other thing is, should we prioritize setting up Black small businesses, or should we say we want to prioritize livelihoods and jobs for the poor? Obviously, you can do some of both, but there is a contradiction given that, government capacity in particular is limited, and land is obviously also fixed. There's only a fixed amount of land. Okay, and so I'm just saying, if we want to think about these proposals as we go, we should be thinking firstly, whose problem are we talking about, and where do women fit in? And what is the diagnostic, and specifically, how do we see landlessness as contributing to whatever the problem is? Because very often it's like, we have inequality, give people land. Yeah? This is really getting to the dreaded theory of change approach to life. But really, how are we saying that landlessness contributes to our socioeconomic problems, right? And political problems? If there are other causes, and if we start by saying, what can we do best around land reform, it may distract us from the fact that there may be better solutions. Now, we spend all our time fighting about land reform, but in fact, it might make more sense to talk about a serious community work program, or to talk about, better basic education for a start, and improving housing, rather than just saying, should people be able to take urban land? But how do we come up with a housing program that works? And think about the support systems also, even for farming. So even in agriculture, I would argue if you start by saying we're going to give you land and then we'll do post-settlement support, it's never worked either here or in Zimbabwe where they also tried. And we should try and think about why is it so hard to get that right? Whereas if you start by saying we want to set up small farmers, what do they need? You come up with a much more coherent program. And then obviously be clear about the specific steps, the prerequisites, and the cost, benefits, and risks. Yeah? And then some specific questions for any land reform program are how to decide on beneficiaries and how do you ensure that women count there? How to identify the land for redistribution? And this is actually a big fight because it's easy to say take underutilized land, but nobody really thinks their land, is a game farm underutilization of land. Yeah? Some people would say yes, some people would say no. If it's a private game farm, it's just for you and your family, and I know somebody who has that. I suspect you know who them too. Then is that underutilization? Yeah? And that's an African family, by the way, that owns that. But also, I would argue that a key issue that we don't talk about is how do you resolve disputes. So very often when the state is changing property rights around, what's actually critical is do people see the dispute settlement system as being fair? That can be as important as the actual compensation system. Yeah? And how do you ensure that if there is a clear dispute resolution system, that women also have equal voice and access? And so I just want to say, I would argue that the real problem is the failure of the 1994 compromise, and people are kind of reaching around for solutions to that failure. And sometimes you end up mobilizing around sort of magical thinking where you say, this is the outcome we want, this will get us there. Even though there's no real clarity about how we're going to get there, how that solution will actually work. And that can lead to very high costs, which tend to be borne by definition whenever there's a big social cost. Unless government intervenes, poor people end up bearing the brunt of that. And women tend to get the worst of it in those circumstances because if you don't have power, it's hard to protect yourselves. But I would also say, and this is really to me what comes out of this whole morning, is you can't retreat to saying, but we won't make any change. And that's the risk, is that people respond to something like shouting about expropriation by saying nothing changes. My experience with business negotiations in the last couple of years, and I don't know if other people have the same experience, is that the whole debate about white monopoly capital made business actually less willing to compromise on things. And that also doesn't help because there will be change. You can't sustain a society as unequal as this without something falling apart. Thanks.
Yeah, I think there are some pretty profound points that were raised there, and I hope that as the state continues, we actually get engaged and really delve down into kind of some of the debates, the issues that are being raised, and that this is a kind of democratic space where people feel they're empowered to express how they feel, what they feel about the submissions that we've heard. We are a bit, struggling a bit with time, so we're going to have a break. We're going to cut it by 10 minutes. We're going to have a 20-minute break, so please come back after 20 minutes. Can someone tell me what the time will be then?
10 to
10 past? Or,
2.
Okay, 10 to 12. Okay, so I think we will, then we'll come back then. Just another point, we are taking a photo outside with everyone there, so please, can you be part of that? And then secondly, there are succulents that were put in the courtyard for people to take with them as kind of a visible reminder of today, this idea of creating something, growing something, and hopefully bringing about something that is productive and good at the end of this process. But please, I know there are a lot of people who have really relevant issues that they want to raise. There's going to be a panel discussion. Please do not silence yourselves. Be ready to engage. Have the questions ready. And we want to talk. We want to thrash the stuff out. We want to listen. We want to come to resolutions. So thank you. Okay.